crunch, bring it back, single leg swing. Let me teach you how to wrestle. Okay. Let me teach you how to wrestle.
For joining us, the solar athlete.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
Two-time state champ wrestler from Utah.
Yep. Two-time state champ wrestler.
Powerlifter.
Then turned into powerlifting later as an adult and stuff like that. So yeah, it was quite the transition. But that is honestly probably my introduction to just being fit and active for sure. Like I started wrestling in second grade and never stopped until my senior year of high school. And even then, there was a stint where MMA was kind of getting popular at that point in time. And so I did a year and a half of MMA after high school. And even now, in my opinion, you don't get paid enough. So it was one of those things where I won my first 4 fights, and all of them ended up costing me money because after the checkup to go to the hospital and whatever, and it's like, oh, I won, but I got a broken nose and now I have to pay for that. And so that quickly was, it was a very short stint in MMA.
Yes. Awesome. Well, so it shows, at a practical level, what these athletes are going through and what it means to train hard and dedicate your life to, sport and, self-improvement overall. I came across your page last week. I just did a show with Jack Cruz not long ago. Kyle Dake, 4-time world champ. He really started embracing a lot of Jack Cruz's principles, not they're his principles, but what he talks about with light, water, and magnetism. I came across your page, The Solar Athlete, and I said, man, here's a guy who's fit. He's living the code, and you explain things so well. I've been, basically listening to a whole bunch of information this last week. I want to give the floor over to you to talk more about some of these different topics. I mean, where do you think might be the best place to start?
Yeah, so just before we started recording, I was kind of highlight some things, especially with wrestlers specifically, but really any high-level caliber athlete, right? Because essentially wrestlers kind of almost fit into that, right? Like if you are a wrestler, you're going to carry over to just about every other sport imaginable, right? Any field sport you're going to be really good at. Any static strength sports you're going to be really good at. So a wrestler in general is what I would consider an overall elite athlete, right? If you're at a high level of wrestling capabilities. And what almost all athletes at that level struggle with is not giving enough, right? Like that's not a thing that a coach is going to struggle with that type of an athlete. What it's going to happen is one of a couple things. One is going to be an actual recovery bottleneck, right? Like this person literally is putting out so much work that we can't really recover him very well, and you got to, throw out lots of different ideas to try to recover, right? And the other possibility is in your head type of scenario, kind of going to your podcast name, Wrestling Mindset. If you almost feel like if you pull back or if you do anything other than more work, it's detrimental to your performance, right? That mindset is not necessarily good or bad. That's just what it is with being an elite athlete, right? And so one of the things that I think is basics that any elite athlete at this level should focus on is little habits that are done daily, right? Just like eating your breakfast, just like going over your drills, just like going over the things that you have to check off every single day that exploit recovery capabilities of your body naturally and augment them, right? Because the body can really do anything and everything. The problem is it can't do it all at once, right? And this is kind of a thing that is embedded in all of Jack Cruz's stuff, but maybe not necessarily said in the way that I am going to say it, which is this. The body can do everything, it just can't do it at once. So it needs to know when to optimize everything, right? And that's how the body literally runs. You're designed to make sex hormones at certain times of the day and not at others. You're designed to make certain recovery neurotransmitters and neuro hormones at certain times of the day that are not supposed to happen at other times, right? So if the body can't tell time, in other words, the timing of the circadian mechanism inside of your body is off, you are no longer optimizing for things that are supposed to happen at certain times of the day. In this particular context, let's talk about recovering, right? Let's talk about, everybody kind of knows, recovery happens when you sleep, right? That's just a known thing, right? The problem is nobody really tells you how to set up the body to recover as efficiently as possible, because everybody knows, and there's no real like scientific evidence, or at least not hardcore evidence that people would understand, that tells you that sleep is not equal. Meaning, when you go to sleep tonight, you're not 100% sure how much you're going to recover versus the next night. And we can clearly know, everybody knows, that sometimes you go to sleep and you wake up at the same time that you normally do, but you clearly did not recover the same. Right, like that's a known thing. I'm pretty sure that that's not a hyperbole thing that people are going to balk at. And the reason for that is this optimization type of thing. Like your circadian mechanism can be more optimized and more ready to recover you than other times. Certain habits will put that in place, right? Like making sure that melatonin production is as high as possible at night, right? So two things are involved with that. Number one is infrared light during the day, ideally through sun, but it can be supplemented at certain times of the year. The infrared light at the mitochondrial level is what makes the mitochondria make melatonin. A lot of people don't know this, but melatonin, 90% of the melatonin in your body is not made or is even in your brain. It's actually in all of the cells in your body, right? Because your nervous system is everywhere. It's not just your brain. So there's melatonin essentially floating around everywhere in your body, being made through reactive oxygen species signaling from infrared light and UV light. That's number one. At that point in time, you're not obviously groggy or sleepy during the day, but when the sun goes away, now that melatonin is allowed to interact with the nervous system at the brain level. And that's what makes you groggy. And that response is augmented by the darker the area or the living space that you're in at night once the sun has gone down. And that means that melatonin will signal at a bigger magnitude all of the rest of the cascades that happen at night, right? So T4 production, which is inactive thyroid, is going to go up after melatonin signaling. So the more melatonin you release, the more T4 is going to be made. Not necessarily for infinite amounts, but the higher that, objectively speaking, versus, hey, if, for example, you work a shift job, right? Like that'll needs you to be up till midnight. Well, you're not releasing very much melatonin at that point in time. And because you've shifted the circadian mechanism, you're not going to make very much T4. T4 is an inactive thyroid that's going to help metabolism in general. And most people just equate that to calories. It's way more than that. It's all of the processes in your body. All of the processes for restoring nervous system, for restoring muscle tissue, for restoring brain function. Those are governed by thyroid. It's governing all of those things, right? So you want that to be nice and high as far as getting sleep. So daylight exposure as often as you can, but at a minimum 3 points throughout the day. Once in the morning for 30 minutes, once in the middle of the day for 30 minutes, and once in the evening for 30 minutes. That's the minimums that I would start with, like if I was dealing with an athlete of this caliber. And
is it at sun? You try to do it as close to sunrise as possible, like get out while the sun is rising, or get out there, I guess, a little bit before, like maybe 2 minutes before, so you could get the sunrise?
I don't try to make it too complicated, and this is why. Yeah. Most of these athletes are going to be young. Like they're
right.
Kyle Date is kind of the exception to this, right? But it's probably because of the things that he does, right? I'll just say that, okay? Yeah. Most of these athletes are going to be young. They're going to be in their 20s and younger. They have way more water content in their body than other people. So water, for people that don't know, water is a red light chromophore, meaning it absorbs red light. So as you get older, your body, like everybody says, oh, you're 70% water. Well, that's kind of true when you're young. As you get older, that becomes less. Right. When you're really young, like in your teens and younger, you're more like 80% water. So you are exquisitely sensitive to red light when you're younger.
So they'll get it more. Red light. So they don't have to count change as much.
Correct. That's exactly. So with these younger athletes, I don't really stress of like, oh, it needs to be right as the sun is rising or 10 minutes before or 10 minutes after. I just say, hey, look at your clock, right? Like your local clock. When does the sunrise happen? Right. And this is the thing that I kind of like. It's going to change. It's going to change all the time. Right. Unless you live next to the equator, it's going to be changing all the time. So you got to step on top of this. It's a thing that you can't kind of leave in the background and be like, I always do this. Because in the winter, it's going to be a different time than in the summer. And all you got to remember is, hey, at this point in time, within 30 minutes of that time, whatever your clock says that the sunrise is, within 30 minutes, I'm going to get outside every single morning. I like to kind of envelope these types of things with athletes specifically. That might be when you do your first aerobic session of the day, right? Ideally outside in some way, shape, or form. I like elliptical, right? Like I'm just talking just baseline cardiovascular training, right? And so I have an elliptical that just sits outside on the east side of my house, and I literally just walk outside and hit the elliptical for 20 minutes, walk back inside, drink my coffee, make my breakfast, go on with my day. That solved a couple things from an athletic perspective. You got your baseline aerobic work in, and you got in the first crucial point of circadian mechanism timing, which is sunrise combined with food, right? Because food and the skin work together through your gut, brain, and skin axis. So when you combine that, now you've effectively set the clock. Think of it like a wind-up watch, right? You've effectively told your body exactly what time it is. It is sunrise right now, right? And that means that it's anticipating a UV signal if it's summertime, or no UV signal if it's wintertime, right? So that's the middle of the day concept of, hey, get outside in the middle of the day. That particular one is more about the skin, because that is sex hormone manufacturing and neurotransmitter manufacturing time, right? And that requires UV light. So essentially what I'm saying is the middle of the day is a tanning session, right? That one is more, obviously, seasonal, right? That one's way more seasonal. In the winter, you're not going to get any UV stimulation in the middle of the day. You can skip that one. But you want to at least experience some daylight at that point in time. So you just go outside for 10, 15 minutes or open a window or any of those types of things. And that, again, tells the body a couple things. If it's wintertime, there's going to be a temperature change. That's why I tell people the best solution is you just walk outside. You're going to become a regular of walking outside, right? Then in the evening, you repeat the same thing you did in the morning. It can involve cardio if you want, if it's needed, but it's just a matter of seeing the different wavelengths at sunset. And that actually preps the next stage of the circadian mechanism, because there's two of them. The daylight version, the active version of you, right, and the recovery nighttime version of you. Right. And so the evening frequencies are red light dominant, and they start to set the stage for melatonin release into the brain and these other things that I opened up with as far as recovery at night.
Right.
The one crucial thing that people kind of are starting to catch on to is the types of lighting that you're going to walk back into the house or apartment building or whatever, then can undo some of the things that you've done during the day. So things that I like to tell people is, if you're traveling or in hotels and stuff like that, a good quality pair of blue light blocking glasses goes a long way.
For nighttime or even during the day?
I would say 100% required at night, right? During the day, if you're going to spend, like you're at a clinic, like maybe you're doing like, some kind of a seminar or something, and you're just going to be inside all the time, and you're not really going to have a chance to step outside, I would say wear them inside. But even during the day. But I wouldn't wear them outside. I see people doing that. I wouldn't wear them outside. And I would for sure use them at night. Now, here's the better hack, right? Here's a better hack, is dinner happens, you went outside, and you came inside, you had your dinner, or you already had your dinner, and you turn off overhead lighting, and you use lamps instead, right? Two reasons why. The lamps you can easily swap out for orange or red lights, right? And it's not really going to be that disturbing. You're not really going to disturb any lighting in your house, right? And you can put them only where you need them, right? So it's a really simple solution to, hey, I'm turning off overhead lighting, but I still need to see, and I still want to hang out. I'm not going to bed at 7 p.m. or whatever when it's winter. So that's a really simple solution. And you don't have to wear any blue light blocking glasses unless you're going to be watching TV or working on your computer. But even then, there are solutions. There's some red film that you can put over your computer or your TV if you really want to go that route. If you're an athlete, you're probably going to watch some TV because you're probably going to be watching video, right? So I would still recommend a good pair of blue light blocking glasses for that purpose. Or you could even upgrade to a daylight computer, right, which is blue light absent. There's no blue light in it at all. It's a little bit more like Harry Potter Etch-a-Sketch type of look, but trust me, it would be worth it. or you can wear some blue light blocking glasses. But the point being is, when you do that, when you remove overhead lighting and change it to lower lighting, your eyes have actually adapted to that. Most of your blue light receptors are actually on the bottom of your eye to catch overhead lighting. So overhead lighting, just LED lighting, is more stimulating to keep you awake when it's overhead than when it's above. Just changing the angle of the light changes how your body's going to respond to that light. Wow. So lowering it below takes that effect away, and making it red or orange means that melatonin production will be significantly less impacted by a lot, to the point where maybe 90 minutes after having those types of lights on, you might start to get groggy. That is a sign that's your body telling you to go to sleep, not the other way around. Because normally you don't have control of these autonomic processes, right, because we didn't have control of lighting, right? The only lighting that we used to have is fire, right? Even as little as 100 years ago, very little electricity. It was all, kerosene lamps, and you still had light at night, but it wasn't blue. It was red complete. And it was almost always at eye level or below, because you weren't reaching way up high to light candles and stuff like that. Right. So this has been an evolutionary type change that we just don't use anymore. The fire light or red light below the eye level changes the way that you're going to feel in the evening, to the point where you're going to feel way more relaxed, and it starts kicking in a parasympathetic nervous system. I'm sure that you talk about like meditation and visualization and stuff like that. That's the time of day where you want to do that type of stuff. Once you change the mood of the interior that you're going to be now sleeping and relaxing in, that's the time for visualization. That's the time for relaxing and becoming smooth with your movements or technique, right?
Right. No,
and then
sense.
And then that preps you, because the one thing you don't want to do when you're doing visualization things is being amped up. That's like the worst thing you can do,
right?
Because then you can start eliciting some secondary things that are going to prop up when you actually execute the movement, right? Being relaxed and not emotionally charged is better for mental practice, right? So that's a great time when you change the mood lighting like that to do that type of stuff, and then it preps you for sleep, right? Hey, I did all my stuff. I feel really good. I'm nice and tired now. That's melatonin being released and telling you, hey, we are ready for nighttime production and nighttime recovery. All we need you to do is fall asleep, right? That's essentially the signal that your body is now feeding you. That signal is absent in most people's lives. Most people are not getting put to sleep. They're actually looking at the clock and going, man, I need to get to sleep because I need to wake up early, and I'm only going to have 7 hours, right? That's where just changing the lighting already starts to do that for you. It starts prepping the body to flip those circadian mechanisms to charge you to get to sleep.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So, okay, so for the athletes, we're looking at 3 times a day, at least 30 minutes outside, if you could do it. If you're, I guess, a coach or a parent, like I think like myself, I'm 40. So it's like, for me, I guess, thinking like try to get closer to the sunrise as I can, be a little more strict with it. Should we we should be trying to go topless with this? Like, try to get as much skin as you can in the game?
Yeah, in general speaking, yes. Like, okay, so, but that's going to take, I don't know, some callus. It's going to take some build up to be able to do that. Like I personally do. Like it doesn't matter the time of year. I literally go outside in my underwear. Like I'm just in my boxers, and I walk outside, whether it's 50 degrees below or 50 degrees, hot in the morning. I'm outside with bare skin, right? I don't necessarily need you to do that right away, but you will start. But underdressing, like a good place to start is no shirt, right? No shirt, wear some socks, wear some shoes, go outside in the wintertime. If it's summertime, I'd really, really rather prefer you with no shoes on, being grounded when you do this, right? And without a shirt on in the morning, and for sure in the middle of the day.
Right.
Okay.
Even as it's getting colder, as long as you could stand it.
Correct. Right. And that's why I'm saying I just tend to tell people, be grounded, right? Bare feet, and be shirtless. Start ideally in the spring, right? But if you're starting in the winter, there's some things that we can talk about of like how to ease into it. But you start in the spring, and you essentially every morning you're like, oh, it's a little bit frigid. And then the summer comes, it's like, oh, this is great. And then the fall starts to come along, and you're like, oh, you know what? I've experienced this before. It's not that bad. And you just kind of keep going. And next thing you know, it's really cold, and you can handle 10 minutes of outside. No big deal. Right. And that's how I like to work it, because it's going to become something that you do every day. You're going to get used to it, right? And eventually you get to the point where, you know what, it doesn't really bother me to be outside for 10 minutes, irrelevant of what the weather is doing. Obviously if it's snowing and raining, I don't need you to go outside and get soaked, right? But I do want you to open a window. I do want you to maybe, hopefully have like a covered porch or something that you can go walk out into. But if not, right, just still go outside, but be dressed for the weather, right? I don't want people getting hypothermia or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is you just want to, especially in the morning, the biggest thing is the eyes, the face, and as much skin as possible in this upper region of the body.
Does it matter? Does it matter if the sun is not hitting you directly?
I wouldn't say that it matters.
No.
I mean, it matters.
It'd be better.
But to the athlete, it's not going to make that big of a difference because of what I stated earlier. They have more water, so they are able to collect more red light from any angle. If you are older, or if you are dealing with a little bit of other mental type things, or just in general, you're just not feeling like you're performing well, then I would say it probably would be worth it being directly in the sun.
Okay.
Right? Especially if you have, because this is a thing that's popped up, which is what I've said, because I do, consultations with lots of different athletes. Every now and then I've seen some athletes that are dealing, not necessarily with like anxiety. They're not really sure what it is, but it's almost like their heart is not coordinated well. Like they're having some kind of a heart arrhythmia, but they don't really know what's going on, and the doctors don't really know either. If you're having anything like that going on, I would say it is worth direct intense sunlight in your eyes at that point, because it has a signaling effect with how the autonomic nervous system controls heart rate and heartbeats, right? So little caveat there. If you're having any issues, yes, you want to be direct sunlight shining directly on you on as much skin as possible. For most athletes, that's not going to be them, so it's not really going to vary very much. If it's cloudy, it's totally fine. If the sun is rising in the east and you're facing, south, it's going to be totally fine. It's not that big of a deal as long as you're actually outside getting the daylight.
Okay, makes sense. And then how about, you see a lot of people doing cold plunges, red light therapy.
Yeah.
Should we be tanning in the winter? I know I'm throwing a lot at you. How do we?
No. All of those are great questions, and the simple answer is that all of those have a place, but they're not necessarily need to be executed like everybody's doing it. For example, let's talk about the cold exposure. Right? I don't really do any cold plunging because I just let the weather dictate how cold I'm going to get. Right? Because the main thing that I just said is, irrelevant of the weather, other than rain and snow, while you're doing it, I'm going to be underdressed, so I'm going to experience cold every time that I go outside. Because the switch, a lot of people don't know this, the circadian switch, in terms of the central climactic nucleus paying attention to light signals or dampening it down and paying more attention to cold signals from the skin, that starts at 55 degrees. So if your skin is experiencing 55 degrees or less, you are getting cold exposure. Okay. That's significantly warmer than everybody doing their cold plunges and all of that type of stuff. I'm not saying that those are good or bad. I'm saying you don't need to do the cold plunging to signal circadian mechanisms correctly. All you need to do is be exposed to 55 degree temperature on your skin or less for about 10 to 30 minutes, which gets solved by, hey, just go outside for 10 to 30 minutes every morning, irrelevant of what the temperature is. And if it's cold, right, come October, for example, every morning is going to be cold. It's going to be in the 40s, right? So you go outside, you experience that temperature. You might shiver a little bit for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then after that, you're going to feel pretty normal. It's still going to be cold, but you're going to be totally fine. And you got cold exposure, you got daylight exposure. If you did any aerobic work, you got in your cardiovascular training. So you kind of coupled everything together. Now, cold exposure at other times of the year, like the summertime and stuff like that, that can be helpful if you know what you're doing when it comes to dopamine degradation and you already cultivated melanin, right? So let me explain that a little bit, okay? Irrelevant of your skin type, everybody has melanin unless you're albino, okay? If you're albino, you are absent of melanin. But even if you're white, you still have melanin. It's just a different color, right? It's a different color than, say, me or somebody else. When you have been like going through a few seasons of this, of collecting melanin and getting a lot of sunlight, you're going to notice that your skin is just a different color than it has been the other points in time in your life. Like my wife is very white, very, very white, like blonde hair, green eyes, white. But she does all of this stuff with me. Her skin in the summertime, in spring and summer, and even right now, is actually a golden color. It's actually gold. But when the winter, she's white as white, right? Like white, like fingernail white, right? And so when you get to that point that you've collected lots of melanin, that your skin has this dark or deep color to it, you can now degrade that melanin into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, right? So when you're young, I'm sure that you have experienced this, when you were almost like sensing things happen before they happened type of scenario, right? Mm-hmm. That is the role of dopamine. Dopamine is a pattern recognition neurotransmitter, right? So when you can deplete melanin and dopamine gets raised to a high level, you essentially time travel at that point in time. You essentially are functioning at the nervous system slightly faster than how you're perceiving time flow, right? So that is incredibly important for any sport. Being able to slow down time and really zone in on what you're doing almost at a faster pace than what's happening. When you get to the point of collecting melanin, you can now on demand deplete melanin by doing a few things. Cold exposure is one of them, right? So things like getting a little bit of cold exposure before a very rigorous training session or a very technically demanding training session, like you're going to train with a very high-end partner or something like that, or even a competition. A little bit of cold exposure, and it doesn't even have to be an ice bath. It could literally be a face dunk, and that will start degrading melanin into dopamine at a faster rate than normal. Other things like that would be breath work. Like this would be the one time that I would say Wim Hof breathing would be beneficial before the event. Other than that, I don't recommend or do Wim Hof breathing, because Wim Hof breathing is a hypoxic event, right? You're blowing off CO2 and you're bringing in more oxygen. When that happens, you become hypoxic because your body does not monitor oxygen, it monitors CO2, right? That's how you breathe. When CO2 builds up, that means that there's a big chemical exchange going to happen for CO2 to oxygen. When you have very little CO2 in the system, there's very, very little exchange that's going to happen. So Wim Hof breathing actually makes you hypoxic. But when you're hypoxic, you deplete melanin into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. That's why Wim Hof breathing makes you feel good, is because you're depleting. So I don't recommend doing that unless you need that, right? So think of like feeding the dopamine machine at that point in time. Other, like, breath work that cultivates aerobic capabilities and stuff like that, and this is actually what I pair with my aerobic conditioning in the morning, is breath hold work. So look up anything for like free diving, deep sea diving, people that can dive, 1,000 meters down on one breath, that type of stuff. Their type of training is what you actually want to be doing whenever you're doing some low-level baseline cardiovascular work. And basically what it's teaching you to do is be CO2 tolerant. Because the flip side is also true. The more CO2 you can tolerate, the more oxygen you're going to exchange at the cellular level. Okay. So that is one thing that's very low-hanging fruit that I think any athlete can use correctly if taught is, hey, whenever you're doing your work, you want to actually be holding back CO2 as much as possible. Nasal breathing is an easy way to do that. Do all of your work to the grade of, hey, I can, and essentially that's what I do for my elliptical aerobic work. I will just go as hard as possible to where I can keep my mouth shut the whole time. And I gradually want to work up the wattage or the output and still be able to maintain nasal breathing only. That's a really low-hanging fruit way to always retain carbon dioxide. And then you can actually go into some breath work techniques and stuff like that after.
So as much as possible, try to breathe through your nose when you're exercising and just in general.
Yeah, okay, absolutely, right. It takes effort. Like, don't get me wrong, it is hard. When like you are going to, if you've never done it before, you're going to be almost exclusively focusing on how you're breathing, right? Right. But once you get good at it, you can essentially do a whole workout with just nasal breathing only, and that is going to be a very oxygenating event and not depleting dopamine. But when you are ready to, go all out, for example, then yeah, some Wim Hof breathing, some blowing off of CO2 will definitely start ramping up the machinery that's going to degrade your melanin into dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline. And now you're going to be slowing down time. You see what I'm saying? Little hacks like that of when to use cold and when to use Wim Hof breathing will exponentially make you better momentarily because of this dopamine response. But you need a substrate to turn into dopamine, right? Most people kind of understand that concept, right? If you don't have the substrate, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not really going to get that same result. So the substrate is the melanin. That's where the daily habits that I'm talking about.
The time is now to take your mindset to the next level with Wrestling Mindset. Make sure you go to our website, wrestlingmindset.com, and sign up for your free trial session today. Don't wait any longer. You want the mental edge right now. When you sign up for the free trial session, you're also going to get a copy of our free ebook, Building the Predator Mindset. This book has helped thousands of people build confidence, relax under pressure, get motivated, and build mental toughness in wrestling, school, and life. Make sure you sign up for your free trial session today.
Play a huge role. You're collecting melanin, especially in the middle of the day. Cold exposure also collects melanin because when you get cold, the mitochondria make its own UV light, right? That's a concept not a lot of people are familiar with, right? Like, essentially what I'm telling you is when the winter comes, your mammal body, your mammal mechanism still needs UV light, but it doesn't exist from the sun at that point in time during the year. So what nature has figured out is if this person gets cold, this mammal gets cold, we can use deuterium in the blood to elicit a deuterium pinch. That effectively makes UV light internally. Now, I've experimented with this a little bit on myself because if that theory is true, it also means that places on your body that don't get cold won't emit as much UV light. So I've worn gloves on purpose when I do my elliptical. Not that I need them for 10 minutes, right? But I put them on purpose. So my hands don't experience any cold when I do my elliptical. My hands will turn white because they're not making any UV light. The rest of my body stays the same color. The rest of my body stays the same color as nearly summertime. I definitely get darker, but it doesn't degrade nearly as fast as my hands. My hands will be almost like a reverse tan. They'll go white because they're not experiencing any cold. So there's no need or there's no ability in the local tissues here to make any UV light. So you don't get tan from the inside out. That's a really foreign concept. Jack has talked about that in other podcasts, but that particular thing, right? So cold exposure done chronically, right? I'm doing it every day because I'm going outside. Right. Means that I'm preserving melanin. So that means now I have a bank of melanin that I can continue to make year round, that I can deplete at any point in time that I choose to, whether it's by volition or not, right? Because a lot of people don't understand that this right here, when blue light shines into your eyes, that depletes, that makes dopamine, right? How does it make it? Through the melanin sheets in your eye and in your retina and in your brain. That's what it's doing, right? So essentially what I'm saying is the more melanin you have, the more protected you are from depleting dopamine to the point where now you're underperforming from a neurotransmitter level.
Right.
I'm sure there was a lot in there that kind of unpacked. So you just kind of let me know. So those are those are.
Good.
Okay. So those are the places where I start, right? So let's make sure that neurotransmitters are running high. Let's make sure that sex hormones are running high. And then let's make sure that sleep is as optimal as possible, right? So with that little sequence of events, that habit, that 24-hour habit of sequence of events that you do, that kind of checks all those boxes for the most part. And there's some caveats here that I need to say. One of them is this. Because this will happen. So some people will be in college. You won't have control of the environment that you live in, right? Apartment building, etc. Those types of things. Those will all deplete melanin because of the electrical communications that you use. In other words, EMFs, electromagnetic fields, deplete melanin at this stage. They do other things as well, but most people that are young are not going to be nearly as affected. They're going to be affected more from a neurotransmitter standpoint because of two things. They don't go outside enough to replete melanin, and they're always degrading it because of the devices that they're always around, right? So some things that you want to consider if that is your situation, meaning the first thing that I would do is just count how many wireless communication devices you have, right? You have a laptop, you have a phone. If you're living by yourself, hopefully that's it, right? But say you live in an apartment building and your 4 roommates, each one of them also have a laptop and a phone and all kinds of other things, right? So, or maybe 2 phones, right? 2 phones, 2 laptops. I mean, I've seen that, right? So at that point in time, you have to consider some things that Kyle Date does. Grounding, for example. You might want some grounding sheets. You might want to verify that you are dissipating the electrical charge that you're collecting from these devices so that you are not depleting melanin, and more importantly, you're not ruining your sleep. So the concept that I talked about as far as like getting outside at certain points in time and then reducing blue light, that goes a long, long way. And then during sleep, you want to make sure that there is no electromagnetic field interfering with your brain. The reason for that is this. When you go through sleep, there's stages of sleep. Most people kind of know this. There's, light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep. And you're supposed to cycle through these about 3 to 4 times to get full recovery. Here's the problem. In REM sleep, you're not making any energy. You are at the lowest possible metabolic rate possible for your body. You're essentially almost dead, right? So your brain activity is almost none at that point. Like a lot of people don't understand that. So think of it almost like you're in a coma, right? But when you're in a coma, there are devices hooked up to you to keep you running, right? So nature has essentially figured out a way to power you down to the lowest state possible and use zero equipment to keep you alive. How does it do that? It does it through wireless communication of your brain to the heartbeat of the planet. It's called the Schumann resonance, okay? That resonance is at around 7.83 hertz. That's the same frequency as alpha waves in your REM sleep. So in other words, in order to get into deep REM sleep and stay there for about anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes, 4 times throughout that night, your brain needs to be able to pick up this 7.83 hertz. Think of it like the jumper cable, wirelessly speaking, that's going to keep the brain activity running at that pace without your body really having to do anything, right?
Okay.
If you have a cell phone next to your head or a Wi-Fi router in your room, that's going to interfere with your brain's ability to pick up that signal. So it won't spend nearly as much time in REM sleep, or almost none. I've seen people literally, and again, I'm not saying that the watches are 100% accurate, but just about every, Oura Ring or Fitbit or any of these things now have the ability to pseudo track your sleep cycles, right? And there's been people that come to me and they're like, I get literally 20 minutes of REM sleep for the whole night. For the whole night. Yeah. I'm like, that's way too low. I'm like, you're not recovering mentally at that point. And so we employ some of these habits, and then one of the main things that I have them do in terms of mitigating wireless communications is very simple. You buy a timer for your Wi-Fi router, you have it turn off at night when you go to bed, and you have it turn back on in the morning, right? You're not going to remember to do it on and off, right? So I don't ever leave it to people to remember to do it. Just buy a little light timer, hook it up, set it so it goes off when you go to bed, and set it when it, just like your alarm clock. And that hack, plus put your phone in airplane mode at a minimum, or if you can't do that and you need it to ring for whatever reason, turn off all your other antennas. A lot of people don't understand. There's not one antenna in this thing. There's like 5. There's a Wi-Fi, a Bluetooth, an NFC, other wireless biometers if you have like an iPhone and things like that, and then the data antenna, and then the texting and voice antenna. So that's 6 antennas in one device. Go and turn all of them off except for the ringing and the text messaging, and then have the phone, on the wall opposite of your head. Right. The simplest solution is just put it on airplane mode, just like you're stepping on an airplane.
Would you keep the phone on airplane mode throughout the day as much as you can anyway, just to?
Yeah, I tend to, just because my job is on the phone anyway, right? So yeah. I tend to I tend to do that, right? But younger kids, they're probably not. They're just not going to do that, right? Okay. So I'm saying, give your body a break, both mentally and physically, by just turning it on airplane mode when you're sleeping, right?
Right.
And that is a really great solution. And then I would still not charge the phone next to your head. The phone next to your head is kind of a bad habit for lots of other reasons, not just the antenna. So, especially because you might roll over and literally pick up the phone and shine it right into your face first thing in the morning. That's kind of like almost the worst thing to start shifting sleep, is bright lights at inappropriate times during the day, like bright blue lights from your phone, right? So that's why I'm like, just put it somewhere else, right? It'll become an afterthought. You're still going to check it, but maybe after you go outside first, right? Just with those hacks of removing the Wi-Fi, not sleeping with your phone, I've seen people's REM sleep go from 20 minutes to triple that to 60 minutes and then beyond as they keep doing that. But that change happens very quickly, like within 2 weeks.
That's great.
Right. So those are the caveats that I will say that, hey, if things don't quite improve, especially with the sleep vector, even though you're doing these other habits, start checking electrical devices, right?
Okay.
Some of these might not be controllable because you might live in an apartment building, right? And that's when grounding, because remember how I said the brain is trying to tune into the earth, that's actually the power of grounding for sleep, is you are now directly connected to the planet through the skin. And a lot of people don't understand that your skin and your brain are the same tissue. Like at an embryonic stage, the skin is the same tissue as the brain, and it comes apart and then wraps around. The same atoms have been split. Everybody knows about entanglement, atom entanglement, meaning if you move an atom on this side of the planet, the atom on the other side of the planet moves with it. They're wirelessly connected. Your skin and your brain have that same capability. So when your skin is touching the earth, your brain can now pick up the Schumann resonance much more clearly. You're making a better connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and are there certain shoes? Like I try to go like minimalist footwear for a different thing for like the health of my knees and my lower back. But is there shoes that you would recommend that would also keep you grounded? Because I haven't found that.
So there are kits for like normal shoes that you can actually make them a grounded shoe. Basically, it's a copper plug. They're not waterproof when you do this, right? So it's a copper plug that goes into the sole and then goes through the main sole and then makes contact with your foot. You'll notice that your foot is sweaty inside of a shoe all the time, and the reason for that is because it's trying to make you grounded. You sweat on your feet and on your palms when you're not grounded, because you're trying to become grounded, right? So one thing that I notice, especially because I'm building my own house, I have to wear a work boot, right? Because I don't want to hurt my feet. When I put my work boot on, literally within 2 or 3 hours, I have to take them off because my feet are so sweaty. But when I wear a grounded sandal or ground the shoe, not nearly as sweaty, because now I'm making contact with the earth. Now my body doesn't require that electrical discharge, if you will. But yes, you can buy kits to ground normal shoes, and they're just like a copper plug and a couple other things that you'll literally put a hole through the bottom of the shoe and ground it. There are already made grounding sandals. Earth Runner makes a pair, several pairs. That's their whole line. So those are already grounded. Shalma sandals, I'm working with them to make some of their sandals grounded. In fact, we probably will end up making most of their sandals grounded, but they're not currently grounded. So the only ones that I can say that are for sure grounded right at this moment you go buy is the Earth Runner ones. And there are other companies that sell grounded shoes. You can just Google that. But the thing you want to check for is they have a metal connector that connects the shoe to the ground and then to your feet. That's like most people want to know, how do you know if it's grounded or not? And, from shopping, that's the first thing I like to look for. If they don't have a metal connector on the outside of the shoe and they're telling you it's grounded, it's unlikely that it's grounded very well. There's ways to test that, and that's a little bit more intricate.
Okay.
But yeah, so definitely there are grounded shoes. And this is the thing, right? Like if you are going to spend all this time of going outside and stuff like that, it's worth having a pair of grounded shoes, in my opinion.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And how about red light and infrared? Because as far as what we should be getting, how should we use it? Is it a certain amount of time you should be in front of it? How close should you be to it?
Yeah. So two things here, right? So actual infrared therapy devices versus just red light bulbs. Okay. They, from a visual perspective and an ambiance perspective and kind of the way that your brain is going to perceive the environment, they both kind of do the same thing, right? So right off the bat, that's why I say the lamps at night, you don't need an infrared therapy device for that. You can just use some red incandescent, ideally red incandescent light bulbs or amber incandescent light bulbs. The reason for incandescence is there's no flicker in an incandescent light bulb versus an LED light bulb. That's important for brain activity, right? So that's why I'm saying at night, you don't really need to spend a lot of money. In fact, an incandescent light bulb is going to be super cheap versus an LED one, and it solves a couple things: the light color thing and the flicker effect. Now, when it comes to infrared therapy devices, right now, these are devices that have specific frequencies in them of red light that interact at the mitochondrial level. Things that you want to look for is at least one frequency in the 600 range, ideally two, and at least one frequency in the 800 range, ideally two. And what I mean by that is they'll be listed on the box. So number one, if the box doesn't tell you these things, I don't buy it, right? Like, this is really that simple. If they're in the infrared therapy world and they're not telling you the nanometers of light that they're exposing you to, don't even bother with the company. I'll just tell you that much, okay? So number one, when you look for nanometers, it needs to say 600, low 600s, 620, 630 nanometer light, and ideally another range in the higher 600s, like 660, 680, somewhere in there. And then in the 800s, somewhere in the low 800s, somewhere in the high 800s, if you get all four, right? But ideally at least one in each section, one in the 600s, one in the 800s of nanometers of light. So that's the qualification of, do I even consider this device usable or not?
And the watts you said too, right? Is there
right?
Such
So
thing as
so now
having
there's
too
the
many
next
watts?
now,
Is too many
yeah.
watts. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So now that you've qualified it, hey, this device probably does what I want it to do or not. Now, is it capable of doing it at a really short distance or a really long distance? The more watts, the less close you're going to have to be to it to get the effect, right? Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, I want to have somewhere as close to 200 watts as a minimum. It can be less, but just know that that device is basically going to be useful only for like placing it almost right on a specific area. It doesn't mean it's not useful. It's just more of, hey, this is something that I use kind of like an ice pack, but in the infrared realm, right? Whereas a much more powerful light, now that becomes more closely to like trying to supplement infrared light that you're missing from not being outside. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So 200 watts is kind of where that starts. Ideally more, but that's kind of where it starts. I have two lights. I have a 500 watt light and a 200 watt light. The 200 watt light I just use in the back because I do a lot of work on my computer, and then in the winter, obviously I'm not going to be outside all day long.
I don't know. I got this thing not long ago. I don't know if it has exactly what it needs, but whatever. Do you keep the infrared and the red light on at the same time, or do you switch it?
I do. No, I leave it both on. So for like the 200 watts and lower lights, I like to have them at my workstation if I'm working inside. I like to have them shining. I like to put it literally on the side, shining at my torso. Right. I don't get undressed for that. I actually dress up, normal clothes and all of that, because red and infrared will penetrate a lot of that. Especially if it's cotton shirts and stuff like that, it'll penetrate right through. So I like to have that on in the background, shining at me for just general health purposes when I'm doing work inside.
Eyes can be open even when you have the real powerful one, or no?
Yeah, even when you have, as long as it's not shining at your face. That's what I'm saying. I put it on the side of me, shining at my torso, and then it's not really interfering with my eyes or anything like that. And that's just a low grade level to passively getting more infrared light energy production, because infrared light increases ATP production by making the ATP ACE more effective, meaning the ATP ACE that's spinning and making ATP at the mitochondrial level. It essentially gets upregulated and more efficient when there's infrared light impacting the mitochondria. So I like to use it when I'm doing computer work because I like to feel energized. Right? I like to feel good when I'm doing work. I don't want to experience brain fog or like, oh man, I'm just kind of feeling tired, or I need a cup of coffee. I don't know what I need, but I'm feeling kind of down. I tend to experience, and most people that I have them do this, of just having some infrared light shining on them while they do computer work, they tend to experience the same thing. They feel more energized for a lot longer periods of time when they're doing a lot of mental tasks. And then in terms of athletic performance, right? In terms of athletic performance, I would say that having an infrared light can be very, very beneficial for the recovery aspect of things, especially as a wrestler. Because let's face it, you're probably not going to be able to do all the things that Kyle does as far as like training outside and training in the grass. Like you can, like ideally that would be the scenario, but you just might not be that person, right? Like maybe you're in Michigan and it's wintertime and you're just not going to be able to do that. So you're going to have to do it indoors, and you're probably not going to be able to convince anybody to change the lighting where you train, right? So a hack that you can do is literally just train like you're going to train, but then have an infrared light therapy session after. Because what is the goal after a training? It's to recover the energy expenditure, right? What did I just say about infrared light therapy? It increases ATP production. It increases energy without you having to eat food. That's a very important thing for a wrestler. If I can somehow get more energy without having to eat more food, that's a net benefit in terms of recovery.
Right.
Okay. So that I would employ something like an infrared session at that point in time. And the goal of that would be maximum wattage, maximum coverage of skin for about 20 minutes. So in that particular context, that's when I would go, I think it would be worth it, an actual drive to an infrared therapy sauna, right, or an infrared therapy bed, right, like one of those Thor beds at professional facilities or stuff like that, where it's literally looks like a tanning bed, but it's red light bulbs, where you just get in it and you get a lot of red light production.
If you're at home, would you just keep it on your torso, or do you put it in front of your face, or what?
So they do make lights, right? So around $1,000 that are as tall as your whole torso, from your pelvis to your head. And you could hang it on a wall, and you could literally do 10, 15 minutes on your backside, 10, 15 minutes on your front side, and that would be very close. But the name of the game post-workout to recover and not have to eat nearly as much food and start the recovery process, because the holdup for recovery processes is everything returning back to energetic baseline, essentially, right? That's when recovery starts. So that needs to either be fueled by food, but everybody should know that food turns into electrons, right? So that is what it is. It's electrical energy, right? So if you can get some electrical energy passively that isn't coming from food, that's going to be a net benefit. So some infrared therapy, and at that point in time, depending on the time of day that it's executed on, most people it's going to be in the evening, so I would just say just infrared light. And if it's early enough in the evening, like before 8 p.m., I would say a little bit of UVA would go a long way as well. And that's literally a black light. All
right, excellent. And like you said, not in your eyes when you're in there?
No, I wouldn't shine it at your face or anything like that. You're mainly trying to go from the neck down, of getting as much infrared light as possible. And if you employ a UVA light, it can literally be just like a $50 panel, a small little panel, because you don't need a lot of UVA light to elicit some of these effects. You just need it shining directly at your torso. And
is it dangerous if your eyes are open?
I wouldn't say that it's dangerous.
It's just you don't need it.
You just don't need it to shine in there. You're going to be getting residual.
Okay.
This is what in terms of eye health, I would not stare at the lights, right? I would not stare at the lights, and I definitely wouldn't get, 6 inches or closer to any of the lights with your open eyes, right? So treat it kind of like a tanning bed, right? Like when you're in the enclosed tanning bed, you definitely don't want any eye exposure there. And, when you're getting in and out of whatever, right? Like that's fine. You have your eyes open, no big deal. Right, so treat them about the same.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And now anything else with, I guess we didn't talk about eating seasonally. And now that talks, I guess that brings in with electrons, right? The conversion of energy or mitochondria.
Yeah. So things like that, and that's what I'm saying. Like if you follow these habits, the very first habits that I just said, your body's going to be in tune to what it should be eating, right? So in the wintertime, when you're experiencing much cold, right? So in other words, when you go out every morning, if the temperature is consistently 55 degrees or less, you start to venture more towards a carnivore style type of diet. It doesn't mean carnivore, like don't eat plants. It means the majority of your calories are going to come from the meat and the fat in that meat. You can have root vegetables, you can have regular vegetables, you can saute those vegetables. You're just not going to want, and you, when you're young, you're going to suffer less of this. But once you get a little bit older, 25, 26, something like that, you'll start to notice that in the wintertime, your body doesn't process carbohydrates nearly as efficiently. So there's a reason for that. The reason for that is the eyes and the skin are telling the gut that you probably, there isn't carbohydrates around. That's what it's telling it, because your gut is another surface that interacts with the environment, right? Like that's your eyes and your skin interact with the environment. And that's kind of where people kind of stop. Oh, that interacts with the environment, clearly. But they forget that your gut is exposed to the environment at two ends, your mouth and your butt, right? That is the environment being able to, right? So the gut's main function is to make sure that things that are supposed to stay outside, right? Like that's actually its function number one, not digestion. Digestion is a secondary thing. Its first job is to keep you alive, and that involves fighting off things that should be outside. That's why most of your immune system is located in something called the GULT, the gut endothelial lymph system, which is where most of your T cells are in the gut. They're right by the gut. And so if the skin and the eyes are telling the gut, hey, it's winter time, the gut is already prepped for not having certain things come in and be digested. Doesn't mean you won't be able to digest them. It means you might experience bloating. It means you might experience diarrhea or upset stomach more frequently, heartburn more frequently, things of that nature. Things that signal poor digestion, right? And so that's where I start to shift people away from rice and breads and things of that nature. Doesn't mean forever. It just means for this season, this time of the year, you're going to eat more tubers, you're going to eat more veggies, and you're going to eat more meat and fattier meats to fuel the right calorie load that you need. And then come spring, you start shifting back in things like rice, things like wheat, and because you're going outside, you're keeping this habit of going outside. Your body, it's clearly a sunnier season. That means carbohydrates should be around. We should start to optimize for digestion of these things now. It's really that simple. Does that make sense?
So paying attention more to like what we seem to be craving rather than just going on autopilot and eating anything.
Yeah. And I'm not necessarily sure that I would say craving. Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Cravings can be disrupted by light signals, right? So that's why I'm saying the first step is the very first habit section that I just mentioned.
Right.
Get outside regularly at these points in time, circumvent light at this other point in time. If you're doing that, then I would say, yeah, the things that you're craving are probably going to be more in line with what you should be eating. If you're not doing those things, the things that you're craving are probably going to be sugars, carbs, etc., the things that you don't need to be eating in the winter. And the reason for that is because you're disrupting insulin signaling. When you're, for example, a lot of blue light entering the eye raises glucose through the cortisol response, right? So, right, that's why I'm saying don't sleep with this next to your head, because you can inadvertently raise a cortisol response when you don't want one, when you're supposed to be going low or prematurely before the sun has come up. You know, if you wake up to go to the bathroom and you check your phone or whatever, for example, that would elicit a cortisol response, and it'll elicit an insulin response, right? So then an insulin response crashes blood sugar. What are you going to want after? You're going to want to bring up that blood sugar. So you're going to crave sugars and carbs and things of that nature. So that's why I'm saying the habits set you up for being able to do it more instinctually than being regimented. So at first you might have to actually pay attention more from a write it down type of perspective of like, hey, it's wintertime, it's clearly cold outside, I'm going to start cutting back my carbs a little bit, eating more veggies, eating more meats and fatty food. And then come springtime, you'll kind of know at that point in time, once you've been doing it for a little bit, you know, one cycle, you know, 1 year, one cycle around the sun, you'll kind of get used to what I'm getting at, as far as you will feel differently when it's time to switch over the carb source or diminish the carb source or add in the carb source.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, man, we hit on so many different topics. Anything else? A few more points you wanted to throw in there? And then, of course, at the end, let us know where everyone could find you to do consultations, any information you have.
Yeah. So I think that's enough as far as because there was a lot there. There really is a lot there. Now, each one of those nuances, right, like your specific place where you live will dictate specific things. And that's where consultations are valuable, right? And that's where coaching is valuable, because it's like, okay, I'm doing some of these things, but my situation is unique. Maybe I live, in a high-rise building, or maybe I have to work a shift work job because I'm a college student, etc. Like, there are unique situations that will need some tweaking to some of these habits, right? And that's where a consultation or coaching comes in play. And you can find me at David Herrera 1119 on Instagram, and also The Solar Athlete on Instagram. Both of those are my pages. The David Herrera one is kind of like where I interact with and post like my clients and post little things about, blood work reviews and powerlifting and my training. That's kind of like where I generally reside for all the miscellaneous stuff. And then the Solar Athlete is just dedicated to the type of stuff that we've just been talking about.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, David. Your wealth of information. I'd love to have you on again. I'm sure after processing all the information, then I'll have, another 20 questions. So
Awesome, man.
appreciate it. Thanks again. Keep
All
up
right.
the great work.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Thank you.